Alright, this is going to be a brief summary and review of the book Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World by Dierdra McClosky. Dierdra McClosky was originally Donald McClosky. I've seen in other books where he's cited as such, and then around 1995 he got a sex change to a woman. This book was recommended by Gary North, I actually think about a year ago, in his lecture at Mises Institute. And I bought it soon after then and just finished reading it. And what the premise essentially is, and it's an interesting one, is that the phenomenal growth that the world has seen since the Industrial Revolution, about 1800, is unprecedented in world history, and the cause for this change is not known. There's many theories, there's lots of speculation, and basically the book is her going through all the theories and dissecting them and showing how they can't actually explain the Industrial Revolution. So popular theories are that it's genetic, that a genetic mutation of some type, an evolutionary adaptation took place in Northwest Europe, especially Holland and the UK, and that this led to the Industrial Revolution. That's one. Peace is another one. That England had a lot of peace. There's the idea that free markets did it. This is kind of the libertarian claim, or a claim at least made by some libertarians, that there was this rampant interventionism, this rampant statism, and that suddenly went away, and that's what caused this. And again, that doesn't really work. How rampant the statism is, in effect, in practical terms, has varied quite a bit over the years, and there have been other places that have had relatively free markets. England didn't become significantly more free market at that exact point, and so she doesn't believe that's it, although she does say that free markets are definitely a necessary prerequisite. They are not a sufficient prerequisite. Now, the first, I'd say, 6/7 of the book, you could read it and not even be certain or even sure how she felt about free markets. She speaks in very, how would I say this, complimentary terms to people like Marx and a lot of other leftists, where at the same time going out of her way to tear down a lot of free market capitalist assumptions. But towards the end, she shows her hand a little bit more. In fact, her theory, and I think is one that is interesting, but I don't know how much it can be proved, is that it wasn't free market so much as an ideological shift that valued what she calls bourgeois dignity, that she considers a virtue. And the idea being that until people start to think that it is a good thing, that it's valuable to save and invest, and that it's honorable to be a business person or an entrepreneur, that is the critical cause of the Industrial Revolution. And the proximate cause is actually is more understandable. It's not, I should have said this first. It's not capital accumulation. Capital has been accumulating for a long time. There was more capital in other places than there was in England at the time. It's not imperialism. It's not foreign trade. All these things have existed before and not caused an industrial revolution. The capital accumulation cannot account for the levels of growth. So if you have just a little bit of capital accumulation, we're talking, since 1800, the average per capita income in terms of purchasing power of goods has increased, 20, 30 fold, not counting for the increased utility of technology. And the explanation for how that's possible with not that much more labor, not that much more capital, is in a word, innovation. That there's a great deal more innovation, and there started to be a great deal more innovation at that time than there is now, or than there was previously. Not that there was no innovation previously, that there was a much lower rate. And so the question becomes, what is the proximate cause of the innovation? I guess, in a certain way, arguments like this always become, a redux of, well, then what, then what, then what? But what causes innovation? And it's McClosky's supposition that it is an ideological shift to where bourgeoisie, trader, merchant values are commonplace and held in high regard. Now, one problem I have with her argument is she, towards the end of the book, she lists some societies, and she only lists a couple, and she explains how they were anti-bourgeoisie. So, China, which is kind of the big elephant in the room when it comes to this, China had all this innovation, it had all this capital, it had all this peace. China had very long periods of sustained peace, it had a lot of foreign trade, blah, blah, blah. If any of these were the cause, then China should have had the Industrial Revolution in, 200 BC. And she says, well, Confucian philosophy is extremely important in the culture of China. Had a negative view generally of traders and merchants, and a much more benign, gracious view about someone who's like a farmer. And then the Christianity, especially in the Middle Ages, had sort of a negative view of traders, that was bad, somehow vaguely exploitative. There is, and I've heard other authors talk about this, there is certainly a connection between Christian theology, Christian philosophy, and socialism generally, Marxism in particular. Not that they're identical or anything, but she refers to socialism as just secular Christianity. I don't think she meant that necessarily literally, but that's kind of how she termed it. The problem with here, or the argument she's making, well, the evidence she presents supports it, is insufficient. I would want to see a cross-examination of as many societies as possible to see how many of them actually had negative views about what she calls bourgeoisie virtues, which, as to be pointed out, is not the easiest thing to measure. She goes into some detail about how it's possible, and I think it is possible if you have an awful lot of data, and the thing is, we don't have an awful lot of data about many societies, period. And very few going more than 200 years ago, and very few outside of Europe, and even within those better understood areas is certainly not complete. You would need to take a survey of them all and establish, because if what she's saying is true, then the Industrial Revolution should have happened anywhere that had bourgeoisie values. And I suppose some of the other prerequisites like a free market. And no point in the book does she offer comprehensive evidence that bourgeoisie values only ever existed in Northwest Europe. And the line that she takes and others have taken is that the Industrial Revolution either started in the UK or possibly in the Netherlands slightly before that. Actually, the cover of the book is a Dutch painting called like the Dignity of Wine Merchants or something. The idea that it's cool to be a merchant, it's good to be a merchant, it's worthwhile. Whereas prior to this, and it's certainly the case in Europe, that prior to this, if you wanted to be an outstanding member of society, that meant aristocracy, that meant military service, that meant being a warrior or a bishop. That didn't mean being a tradesman. And I remember reading in Escape from Freedom by the Marxist Erich Fromm, which is essentially about Nazism, though. He talked a lot about the views of the Catholic Church and markets, and they tended to have a relatively negative view. By and large, that was the main orthodoxy. Not uniformly. It's not like every person who wrote on the affairs was negative. But I think she would need to show that, and then show it seems to me hard to believe that only Northwest Europe at this time period ever had bourgeoisie dignity. It must have existed before. She attributes, by the way, the success of other societies to industrialize as to them acquiring bourgeoisie dignity. So in India or China, to the extent that they've been successful, it's because they've adopted as virtues these characteristics, and to the extent that societies haven't accepted them, they haven't industrialized. But it won't. And finally, she really kind of gets explicit in tipping where her loyalties lie. She has a section where she names. It's a paragraph, but it's about one sentence long, but it's almost an entire page, where she just starts listing all the people that she thinks exemplified and perpetuated the bourgeoisie dignity. And it's a long list, but if you're an Austro-libertarian, you won't be disappointed. Obviously, the likes of Bastiat and Adam Smith are on there, de Tocqueville, but also Menger and Mises and Rothbard and Friedman, and I mean it's kind of a who's who. There's several points where she addresses libertarians, and she addresses Austrians too. She talks about Hayek more than any of the other Austrians. I think he's probably the economist who's cited the most, although it's spread out. She does cite Mises. She does say that complete socialism is impossible. That Mises essentially predicted this. He said that it would be this way, and then they had an empirical test called the Soviet Union and verified his theorem. And then she lists him later in the list of luminaries. It is interesting. She does talk about Sweden quite a bit, and not all in one spot. And some of the things that she said I thought were kind of strange. She says, bourgeoisie dignity became very common in the West, but it never eliminated completely the previous aristocratic ideology. And the aristocratic ideology has manifested as socialism, as the idea of you shouldn't be free, you shouldn't be able to be an entrepreneur, you should be confined and restricted by not the landed gentry or by the king, but by the state. And that the first kind of guise was nationalism, and then socialism, and now environmental socialism. And she speaks of Sweden as kind of like the archetypal most advanced stage of this. And she went on to say, that Swedish people are basically neo-pagan earth worshippers. She didn't use that term, although that's a term I have used, others apply. I actually took a paragraph where she was describing how Swedes worship trolls. Well, like literally says that they worship, the trolls from Swedish mythology, and I posted it on the anarcho-capitalist Swedish page on Facebook. There's about 80 guys on there, and I figure they're going to be the least environmentalist. So if there is actually an environmental bias in Sweden, these guys are going to, and I think they're all guys, are going to be really aware of it. And when I posted it, the response was that it was extremely exaggerating. That there are people in Sweden who spend a lot of time in nature, and those people tend to be rural people who actually tend to view nature as a resource to be exploited. Something that's there for their pleasure, not something that should exist independent of human caring. It's urbanites who tend to have a more paganistic view of nature, and they don't actually spend that much time in it. And that there's a lot of, she says that they're trained in school from day one, basically to worship the troll Molly and Laxdila and a couple others, Nova, and I was told that's categorically not true. That they teach them things. They said that in elementary school they'll maybe have one day where they teach them about basically wilderness survival, and those characters, those mythological characters, are kind of like cartoons that are used as instructional things. Kind of like McGruff or something like that. I don't know, who knows McGruff, Take a Bite Out of Crime? I don't think he exists anymore. Anyway, so I think she may, and of course when you find that out, then you start to think, okay, how much of the rest of this sounds plausible but is actually an exaggeration. The writing style is very fair. It doesn't come across as unfairly partisan or anything like that, but whenever you encounter an incongruity with reality, so far as you can tell, then alarm bells should go off. I recommend this book, definitely. I'm not knocking it, I'm just saying, and some of the Swedes said, well, I guess you could see how you could say that, but it certainly was it was taking the argument too far, at least most of the time. I'm sorry about the shadow. The sun's coming up, and it's actually a really nice day. So there's that. But yeah, so these thinkers, she says they're trying to perpetuate the bourgeoisie philosophy, but then you have all the Marxists and the socialists and the social democrats who are against it. Now, her big fears then is protectionism and stuff. She goes, that's bad, that shouldn't happen. She agrees, trade should be good, you should have free markets and open markets, and there shouldn't be minimum wage. She goes, but when the government institutes those things, those are out of themselves only little cuts. They're not that dangerous. But what is dangerous is the potential for an ideological regression back to, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, you shouldn't work hard, you shouldn't innovate, this is my place in society and I'm going to live it, because that is where we go back to and she believes that it is possible that we could go back to pre-industrial standards of living. Well, we've essentially, the Industrial Revolution allowed humanity to escape the so-called Malthusian trap. Malthusian trap is simply that with a higher population, the number of resources go down. The number of resources per person goes down. And so the standard of living decreases as population increases. And if you have technologies that make life better, which over the course of human history have always been kind of steadily accumulating, all that means is the population expands to fill, so if grain yields increase from 1% to double that because of technology or new farming techniques or irrigation or whatever, that doesn't mean everyone is going to, in the long run, be twice as wealthy. In the short run, yes, but that increased wealth is going to stimulate population growth. Population growth will, theoretically roughly double. That will consume that surplus, and so you'll have twice the technological advance will only mean that you have twice the number of people, but with the same standard of living. Both she and the author of A Farewell to Alms talk about this quite a bit. The standard of living was essentially not changing for thousands and thousands of years. Some people even believe that the standard of living went down in the Neolithic Revolution, not just paleo diet people. There's a lot of anthropologists who believe that Mesolithic and Paleolithic peoples lived healthier, better lives than Neolithic people. I think it was either her or Farewell I think it was Farewell Alms who said that might be true, but it's sometimes exaggerated. Needless to say, the idea that from, say, 10,000 BC or 8,000 BC all the way up onto 1800 there wasn't a very high increase in standard of living, that is actually a fairly conventional view. But there's been this huge increase since then, and she's attributing it to and others have as well, to innovation, and she's attributing the innovation to this ideological shift, which she, by the way, can't explain. I think I know what Gary North would say, that it has to do with post-millennialism and the eschatology of Protestantism to having a positive view of the future. I wouldn't assume he says that. I know that's what he thinks because he says so in the lecture where he recommends this book. And she does actually talk about eschatology in the book for a little while, but not to the point of saying it's the actual cause. She admits she doesn't know what the cause is. But there is a danger of people thinking, we can't be innovative because it's going to hurt the earth, because we're consuming too many resources. And she explodes that. There's a chapter right at the end, and the chapters are fairly short. There's a chapter right at the end where she basically summarizes Julian Simon's book, and she cites Simon repeatedly, and in a very, very positive way, that, look, the idea that wealth is a factor of resource exploitation is ridiculous, because if that was true, then Hong Kong would be poor and South Africa and Russia would be the richest countries in the world. It is clearly not a question of mere resource consumption. It is a question of innovation and how you use it. A given set of resources can be, how can I say this? We can take a certain quantity of copper and rubber, whatnot, and if we don't have any innovation, we can't really do much with it. But with innovation, we can create something that potentially can make all of our lives a lot better, literal wealth. And the more innovation that we have, the more we can do with it. So it's not the increasing pie, so to speak, is only partially explained by increased exploitation of resources, and by partially only slightly. Most of it is through innovation. But what's interesting is the socialists, the protectionists, the anti-free traders, the anti-liberty people, and the environmentalists are against innovation. They're against humans. She actually quotes Simon approvingly that the ultimate resource, in her opinion, also is humans, that humans are the key to this. That was a pretty cool chapter, actually. That was a nice, I thought that was a nice hat tip to Julian Simon, who died a little too young. I would have liked to seen more hat tips to Murray Rothbard, but whatever. She didn't want to give them. Maybe she didn't think it was pertinent. I guess that's maybe a little personal bias on my part, but whatever. He's mentioned in there. And so it's interesting. She chides libertarians. She goes, libertarians, it doesn't just take free markets. Free markets are prerequisites. You need free markets, and I agree with free markets, but you also need this ideological basis in the population. And I'm not sure if I think there are some libertarian theorists who explicitly think, hey, you need to have the people believe in this kind of thing. And I just was listening to Albert J. Knox said that there can be no right action without right thinking. If you are thinking the wrong things, then it doesn't matter even if the right thing happens, because you're in the wrong state. A revolution with the wrong thinking people is no revolution at all. It's just a coup d'etat. I think a lot of libertarians explicitly say that you need to have an ideological shift, and even if they don't all say that, in effect, that's what they're doing. The entire focus of libertarian effort, there's a little bit that goes into research. So there are some Austrian economists who research this or that, but almost all of it is in evangelism. Almost all of it is like my YouTube channel or other people's YouTube channels, which they're out there to try and shift the ideology of people. And so I think that I don't think she was criticizing libertarianism. Well, she was. It was a critique, but I'm wondering how it seems like libertarians, maybe they don't explicitly hold her views, but are in essentially doing what she was recommending, because they seem very interested in shifting the way people think. It's not like their only effort is to go to the government and beseech them to end these protectionist things, these interventions in the market. Yes, they do that. Yes, we favor those, but I think maybe it's just a function of how little political power libertarians have, that instead they're just going, okay, we don't have the power electorally to get anything done at the government's level, except on issues that have broader appeal than just strictly libertarian ones. And so libertarians have been taking it. And I know with Rothbard, that's explicitly what he was trying to do. I think with Ron Paul, that's explicitly what he was trying to do. I think with people like Walter Block and Brian Kaplan and a whole host of others, that's what they want, is to try and change people. Well, she talks about Ryan Kaplan as well, and Don Boudreaux, and I actually went and watched I typed her name. You can type Dierdra McClosky. That's Deirdre, so it's spelled kind of Deirdre N McClosky, McCloskey. I looked her up on YouTube, and there are lectures of her, and I watched about 20 minutes of one, and then I fell asleep, but she spoke very highly of George Mason. She said it was the best school in the country, and blah blah blah. So that kind of also betrayed her. She's very I'm not going to go there. So yeah, definitely a very interesting book. Lots of reference material. I thought I had a lot farther to go, and I'm like, oh, that's the end. The rest of this is the notes. There's more than 100 pages of of citations. So, and again, this is one of those books where, oh, okay, I need to buy this book now, I need to buy this book, and never ends. So, anyway, I think that's about covers it, and I'll talk to y'all later.